Welcome to the Growth Mindset Podcast with me, Sam Harris, your host. I invite fascinating humans from all walks of life to share their wisdom and unpack their mindsets and formulas for growth. Hello, everybody. Today, I want to talk to you about something that I think is commonly misinterpreted and can be quite anti-growth mindset. And it's the concept of quantity and quality. And I think we're often told that we need to focus on quality and things like the 80-20 rule or the quote around, if I had to chop down a tree, I'd spend 3 hours sharpening the axe and 20 minutes cutting it, etc. It makes you think that you really need to overplan things and do things completely perfectly the first time. And that gives you a fear of failure and a fear of just doing things where you don't know what you're doing and then learning and improving afterwards, or as you're going along, and it stops you from finding a flow in just doing stuff. And I think, not always, but in many aspects of what we do, it can actually be better and will give you a better sense of a growth mindset and help you improve if you go the opposite way and go for quantity over quality. And I just think that we can deliberate a lot before we take action. And so if you're trying to seek a perfect decision, it will just cause you to hesitate. And I know plenty of people who want to start a business but are waiting for like a perfect $1 billion idea. Or I know people who would want to be writers, but they're waiting for like the perfect thing to write about, and they just never found their flow of just starting and doing things and then working it out along the way. And we don't realize that when we get into a practice of just putting ourselves out there and we accept that we're going to fail a lot, we'll unlock a much bigger upside in the long run. And I think to be lucky, you just need to be consistent, and to be creative, you also need to be consistent. And prevention versus promotion mindsets are really important factors in the drivers of success in this area. And if you have a prevention mindset, you're trying to not fail, you fret about things, you overthink them, and it just stops you from getting anywhere. Whereas if you have a promotion mindset, you see the upside of trying and you don't worry about the failure, you just do it, and that's where you really want to be. And so a really good example is from, I don't think James Clear did this, but it's in his book in Atomic Habits. And it was a study on students who were doing a photography class where they were split into two groups. The first group that was tested on the volume of their work, they had to take 100 photos. That was their task. And there was the other group was to take one photo, and it had to be the highest quality photo that they could do. And what will surprise you is that the first student that were trying to just produce as many photos as possible, they ended up producing much better quality photos because they just started straight away. They tried different things. They learned about like apertures and their settings, and they sort of anything they thought that might work, they just tried it. And like a lot of the things didn't work, but then sometimes things worked really well and they were surprised. And they just got into the flow of creating things, and like they still wanted to make good stuff. So they just tried lots of things and really amazing things came out. Whereas the second group, these were the quality ones that tried to make the most perfect photo. They spent lots of time thinking about it, and they were kind of worried about like doing anything that wasn't going to be good enough, and they'd only do things that would be perfect. They didn't take any chances, and they weren't consistent with creating. They didn't actually learn like all the settings on the camera or how to make the best shot because they weren't trying. So they kind of overthought the whole thing and didn't really create anything truly amazing. And so it's just a really good example where exposing yourself to trying stuff will likely end up making you do more things, well, do better things. And so if you just try stuff without expectation, you're much more likely to learn from all your failures and actually get to something that is closer to perfect than if you just try for perfect straight away. And then another nice way of looking at this that's perhaps relatable in a very different way is if you think about like your choices and on the things that we consume. And so the way I think thinking about this was like if you're trying to decide movies or like going for a restaurant, because these are things that I go through phases where like I won't do either of them for a very long time, and like I'll go to like a restaurant like once a month, and it will like I'll spaz out a bit. I'm like, shit, I don't know what to choose. Oh god, it needs to be the best restaurant, and like I have a real big fear of failure. And it's the same with movies when I'm just not watching any TV at all. Like there's so many movies that are coming out. I've been told about so many different things. I've got no idea what to choose, and it kind of annoys me. I'll spend too long doing it, and then I'll try and overthink it, and I end up screwing it up and it's really annoying. And I end up not making the best choice anyway. And it's just kind of stupid. Whereas when you are in a cycle where like you go to a restaurant like 2 or 3 times a week or something and you're watching movies regularly, you start to just have a lot more flow in what you're doing and you're not so worried about making the perfect decision. You're just more in the flow of, okay, there's a whole like section of different things that I want to try out in terms of restaurants or these movies. And you just sort of add things to your list and you get through them and you'll end up discovering some real hidden gems that you hadn't expected to find, and there'll be some flops, and it's just kind of all part of the thing, but you end up getting the better parts out of it. I'm not saying that you should definitely just go and eat out at lots of restaurants anymore or watch movies all the time, but it's just, I thought this was a nice way to think about it in that like it just shows that you're going to find the good things, and we all know that we've watched a movie that we didn't think was going to be good that ends up being amazing, and same with restaurants. And so if you think of that the same way with your creativity, well, your creative pursuits, there's lots of things that you just have to try without any expectations, and you'll suddenly surprise yourself how well you've done something. So I just trying to give you like very different sorts of examples so that you can then make your own parallels in between that yourself without me having to give you every single example that you might want to do in your creative pursuits, if that makes sense. And just really emphasize the point, there's a lot of upside opportunities when you're happy to embrace some failures without worrying too much about the potential costs or looking stupid. So going back into some other examples of things that I've been trying to do in the creativity side of things, I've been trying to do a lot more writing lately, and something I've noticed is that when I was starting, again, I used to overthink it way too much, and it would take me ages, and I just wouldn't start anything. Whereas if you try and do a practice of writing every single day, just for half an hour, it becomes really easy. Like I did a week where I just wrote every day, and just during the day, I would notice little things. I was like, oh, this is definitely something I can write about. And I just started seeing things that I could use everywhere, and I'd have like 4 or 5 ideas a day, and I didn't actually have time to write them all. And just the one that sort of grabbed me the most each day was the one that I would end up doing. And it didn't really have to try and analyze the whole thing. Whereas if I try and write like one thing a month, I just go a bit nuts about it and I'll overthink everything, and I just won't feel that secure about putting anything into paper. And it really blocks me. And it just creates a really shitty way of doing things. Whereas if I'm just like happy to just write lots of stuff and accept that some of it won't be very good, I'll end up making lots of better things. And it just really helps on the flow of decisions, because it just makes you more motivated to just keep on doing more stuff. Because I'm not so worried about things going wrong, and you just have more and more ideas coming at you. And it's not so much of a... Whereas before I try and analyze, okay, these are the 5 different topics I thought that I might write about, of working out which one's going to be best. Instead, it's more of I've got 5 new ideas every day. It's the one that's just sort of in my mind the most that I literally can't stop myself from not writing, if that sort of makes sense. I think there's this whole concept around, I think it's motivation, but basically things are just very motivating in the moment, and then if you kind of let it sit for like a week or something, you just lose your passion to go and do it. And so certainly with the writing, if I just write a bunch of ideas and they come and review them like a month later and be like, oh. Whereas if it's sort of in the moment, the one that grabs me the most, I just have to go and write. That's the one that gets decided for me, and I no longer have to worry about trying to make these decisions, which is just like another whole level of blocking my creativity and actually getting anything down. And so it just saves you from having to make judgments, which if you're someone like me who's very creative and shit at judgments, then that should be helpful for you. So anyway, quantity over quality. And it's the same with, well, I'm also doing comedy writing lately, and I just find it being blocked on wanting to make something really good. And so this is what I'm actually talking about is something I wrote a while ago, but I just thought it was really very relevant to me at the moment, especially as I'm trying to sort of think of new things that I should do with my life. And I'm like, yeah, comedy writing, that'd be fun. And then I've written a bunch of different sketches and I just haven't really worked out a way to film them or make them in the way that I really want to. And I'm like, okay, fuck it. I'm just going to sort of put some shit things on TikTok. And if they're slightly funny, that's fine. I'm just going to learn and get better. So hopefully by the time you hear this on the podcast, I'll have a TikTok account, maybe, where there's some of me doing stupid stuff. Probably. Who knows? Anyway, back to summarizing what's gone on. Basically, I think that
quantity is really important and trying to get a level that suits you. So like I spoke with my writing, whereas if I do one post a month, it's really hard. Whereas writing every day, it's really easy. But then writing every day is perhaps too much of a commitment if you don't have 1 hour every day to put into it. And so trying to find the threshold where it just sparks your creativity and reduces your fear of failure and removes the blockers, but it isn't too much to take on. So I found that doing a newsletter once a week was enough to keep me always thinking of ideas to write about, and that like I'd be inspired enough to definitely like get one to paper each week, even if I'd like to have been doing more. But it kept me consistent enough in doing it, whereas doing it one a month is just no point. And doing one every day is just like, it just overwhelms myself. I'll do it for like a few days and then I'll sort of stop. So in whatever creative thing you're doing, work out what the quantity needs to be so that you stop worrying about the quality so much and just keep doing it, but isn't so much that it stops you from doing it at all. And then I think that's like just a magic formula for you and whatever that thing is. So that was my example for writing, but it might be different for, let's say you want to start a business, because maybe you want to try and start one every year or something and just have a project that's like a bit of a side hustle and see what happens, learn, don't worry about failure. If it goes wrong, start again next year. And after 5 years of doing that, one of them is going to be really awesome, etc. Things like that, I think, just makes lots of sense. I have way too many examples, actually. I just realized with some of my other podcasts where I did like a book podcast, and initially I was just thinking very short term about the whole thing, and it was like, crap, what book are we going to read next? It has to be the best book. And then it was the Wiser Than Yesterday podcast. If you listen, it's quite good now that I've worked out how to make it better. So me and my co-host, we changed to doing seasons where we'll choose an author and we'll read all of his books, or we'll choose a topic such as racism, inequality, or money and investing, and we'll just try and pick 10 good books that cover different aspects of that whole subject. And then we'll read through one book each episode. And it suddenly made the whole decision very easy and my thinking very long term. And we ended up reading some books that were shit and reading some books that were amazing that we wouldn't have never thought of. And again, exposed us to things we wouldn't have got to if we'd just gone like one book by one book, just trying to read like the greatest books ever without any real sort of coherent pattern behind the whole thing. Anyway, I think I'm getting a little bit too far into the examples now, and you've probably got the point that quantity is really useful. It just helps create a more longer term mindset, boosts your creativity, and makes the whole thing more enjoyable. Thus, you should do more of it. And I guess that leads me to my final point about the fact that I really want to do more of my own podcasts, because I found that the podcasts like these get a lot more listeners than my other podcasts with the interviews. And it also forces me to be more creative and actually come up with ideas myself rather than just trying to get other people to give me good ideas. So I'm still going to be doing all the interviews for sure. And ideally, I'd like to get to the point where I'm making one of these a week and having one interview a week. And that would be great. But we'll see. As I said with the quantity thing just now, I'm going to work out what my balance is. And hopefully we'll have something consistent coming at you that just provides good value growth mindset tips, because I think like this one is something that's actually really changed the way I think about growth mindset and has actually helped me do a lot better. And that's the point of the podcast anyway. And so there you go. I hope you enjoyed everything. And remember, if you're thinking about doing something, don't worry about getting it perfect the first time. Just try and do quite a lot of it. Oh God, I can't speak. I've reached the end of the podcast. I'm losing it. Thank you for listening. Take it easy. I've been Sam Harris. This was The Growth Mindset.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on the Growth Mindset Podcast. Before you head on to another episode, what was your biggest aha moment from today's discussion? Why don't you hit pause and ask yourself what you learned today? You can also share with us or me your insights by joining me on Reason.fm, a social podcasting player that I built. Just discover new podcasts and connect with other hosts and listeners and discuss things. And if you're a podcast host, you can now create your own show on Reason FM for free, completely free. And that's all from me for today. So with that, please keep learning and keep growing.